Meteorologist Dr. Raywat Deonandan, science communicator at the U of O. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think of that number?
This is the first I'm hearing of it, just seconds ago when you mentioned it. So what do I think of it? I think it's probably okay, to be honest. Maybe not right now, maybe in a few weeks. Like, some of the modeling is showing that we'll be done with the bulk of this wave by the beginning of November or so. So by that point, that's the time to try out some new things. And if everyone is vaccinated, really vaccinated, and wearing masks, the probability of someone with an infection sharing it with somebody else in that room or that stadium is low. So I'm mostly okay with it.
Double vaxxed, because that'll be the rules. You want to keep the masks on. What about social distancing? Impossible when it's half the crowd.
Yeah, it is impossible. And if it's an outdoor stadium, then it's not really that much of an issue. And frankly, even the indoor, distancing is not as important as ventilation because COVID is airborne, it's aerosolized. And with an aerosolized particle, it doesn't really matter if there's space between you. What matters is, are you sharing the same breathing air? So one hopes that the facility has some good HEPA filters or other kinds of air purification systems in place. But the most important thing is the vaccination and the mask wearing.
What is the biggest game changer that made you okay with this?
The vaccine passports, frankly. If you can guarantee that everybody in that facility is vaccinated, that means they are profoundly less likely to be infected. And if they are infected, they're profoundly less likely to be transmitting it. And if they are transmitting it, then the people around them are profoundly less likely to be receiving it. So those three layers of protection add up to something extraordinary. Not perfect, but extraordinary.
Dr. Ray, there could be kids under the age of 12 who can't get vaccinated at those games.
Oh, I didn't think of that. Well, that's not cool. Well, so long as they're wearing masks as well, the risk is low. Now, you've added a little wrench in my thinking there. I hadn't thought that through, hadn't I? So I'm not.
Yeah, well, that's the breaking news, right? So there are a number of issues, which is why I went there. The question I have is, would you avoid taking your unvaccinated kids to the game then?
I would, yes, I would. I don't think it's worth the risk for my child to be exposed to a situation like that. Not until the COVID rates in the community come down really low, so the probability of it entering that stadium is low, or until he's able to get vaccinated.
And the concern is that they're not protected.
That is correct. That is correct. Now, as I mentioned, one vaccinated person transmitting it to another vaccinated person, the probability is low. A vaccinated person transmitting it to an unvaccinated person, it's not that low, if indeed that vaccinated person is infected, which of course is another probability computation.
Okay, we talked indoors at the CTC. What about outdoors at a Red Blacks game? Would you take the kids there?
I'm more comfortable there, especially if I can create some space. Again, I just mentioned that space isn't that important, but it's psychologically important. I personally would not be taking my child to any group endeavors like this, but for those for whom this is an important consideration, then outdoors is the way to do it.
Is there a number you put either where you would take your kid to that is the cutoff right now?
The number would have to do with the transmission rates in the community. And the CDC has certain guidelines or what that would look like. So it's a combination of the test positivity rate and the rate per 1,000 in the community. The exact numbers I don't remember, but the idea is if the transmission in the community is low enough, it means your probability of being exposed to it in this environment is also low. It's complicated by the fact that you have people out of town attending these games as well. It's not perfect. But there comes a time when you have to accept some degree of risk. So that risk is mitigated by the procedures we mentioned and also the levels of transmission currently in the community.
Can we talk about the CDC, booster shot 65 and older, anyone who comes into contact with high-risk individuals? Is it only a matter of time before we do that here?
I think we're going to do that here, yes. Yeah, and I'm not a fan of booster shots for everybody right now because I'm on board with the plan that we should vaccinate the world before we start thinking about perfect immunity for ourselves. But for those who are older and for those who are immunocompromised and for those who are less likely to mount an original immune response, this isn't a booster. This is part of the prime series. So yeah, I'm totally on board with that, and I think it's going to happen here.
Remember when everybody wanted the Pfizer? Well, in a half dozen studies published over the past few weeks, Moderna's vaccine appeared to be more protective than the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine in the months after immunization. Here are the numbers, Dr. Ray. The Pfizer vaccine had an effectiveness rate of 88.8% compared with Moderna's 96.3%.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, and I'll tell you why I'm not surprised, because the early animal studies for Moderna were really compelling. And early on, I was really excited by Moderna, and I still am. So this should quell some of people's hesitations about Moderna. I don't know what the hesitations were all about in the first place. It was an unknown quantity. That's the problem, I guess. So there comes a time maybe that Moderna will be the provider for boosters for everybody. I doubt that,
Going to ask. Yeah, I
but
was going to ask that. If you're a Pfizer person or an AstraZeneca, should you ask if you have a choice for the Moderna one to balance it out?
I don't think it matters, to be honest. If you're looking for a third booster, any of
Yeah.
the third boosters will ratchet up your immune response to an extraordinary limit. And whether it's Moderna or not isn't going to make that much of a difference.
So 88.8 versus 96.3. I mean, one is an A and the other is an A minus. I get it. But in terms of how it plays out on the body and the way in which you're going to be less protected versus more sick, how can you summarize the real risk here?
Oh my goodness, I can't. These are all just averages and probabilities, frankly. So it's going to vary from person to person, from population to population. It's going to vary in terms of infectious dose and so forth, and your innate comorbidities. These are just numbers to consider how it's going to manifest at the population level. How much protection does a population fully immunized with Moderna have versus one fully immunized with Pfizer? I wouldn't put too much investment in these numbers unless you're literally investing in these companies. Or, but in terms of your individual choices, they're both extraordinary.
They're interchangeable in the big picture, and that's all that matters.
Yes.
We have them. We should be grateful.
Precisely.
Speaking of which, there are some who aren't. In fact, they were going to COVID parties in Edmonton. You hear about this?
I have
Remember
heard
the
about it.
chickenpox parties?
Yes,
So what
I
they're
do.
doing is they're actually going to get COVID so they get it over with. Some of them, Dr. Ray, in Alberta, are now in ICUs.
Yeah, not surprising. Not surprising. It's not a good idea to seek natural immunity. Natural immunity is real. Some people are going to get it, whether they like it or not. Delta has a way of just raging across the population and leaving in its wake havoc, misery, suffering, and immunity. But it would be nice to avoid the havoc, misery, and suffering, and you do that through vaccination, not through infection.
At what point, Dr. Ray, if not now, do we push the intervention process here? Because these are people who are purposely getting sick. And we say, when people put themselves in self-harm, we have societal measures to ultimately protect them from themselves, and we make it mandatory in this country.
Yeah, that's an ethical question. Like people choose to smoke, for example, put themselves at harm that way. We don't intervene. We do tax them. We do shame them by making them smoke outside the restaurant. And that's what we've done a little bit with vaccine passports. But at an interventional level, I don't know what we do in ethical, liberal, democratic society except dangle more carrots and offer more sticks that are not totally coercive. So
What's left?
what's left, exactly. What's left except better education? That's what we've got to fall back on. People need to understand what the risk actually is and show them the inside of an ICU room.
Why don't we make it mandatory to get rapid testing and charge them for it?
Oh, I like that idea. That's called nudge economics. You nudge people a bit by bit towards making a better decision by making it uncomfortable to take the other decision. So, and one way to achieve discomfort is through finances.
That being said, we think that reasonable people would get it. We're not dealing with reasonable people who are going to COVID parties. They're not open to conversations or change. So can we trust they're going to go and get rapid testing?
I don't know if it's fair to say they're unreasonable. I think some probably are unreasonable, but many are just subject to misinformation. And they've been told it's like the chickenpox. They probably heard Larry Brilliant say Delta spreads like the chickenpox. It does. It doesn't mean it's as serious as the chickenpox. It's a different disease entirely. So I think we got to try the educational approach. But what do you do with that handful of people who just cannot listen to reason? I'm hopeful that they are such a small minority that we can work around them.
True or false? This is the pandemic now of the unvaccinated.
Oh, absolutely true. No question. The probability of a vaccinated person achieving a breakthrough infection is really quite small. I've seen some studies saying it's 0.2%. And amongst those who do get infected, only 6% or so will get symptoms. So compare that to the unvaccinated, the risk is 20 to 40 times higher. Absolutely. Our hospitals are filled with unvaccinated people. They are not filled with vaccine injury people.
True or false? The unvaccinated are prolonging the suffering for all of us.
I think that is true. Look, if everybody got vaccinated today, this crisis goes away in a matter of weeks. Not months, not years, weeks.
It's that simple.
Yeah, because if I'm vaccinated and you're vaccinated, my probability of getting infected is low. If I am infected, my probability of being transmissible is low. If I do transmit it, your probability of receiving my transmission is low. You factor this up to the population level, then the amount of endemic disease we have is unable to find purchase and achieve outbreaks if everybody is vaccinated.
In our vaccine rollout rate, we don't include those under 12. How much of a game changer will it be in terms of the spread, at least? Not the numbers, but the spread.
It'll be huge because unvaccinated people tend to be geographically and socially linked, and that is very true for kids under 12 who play together and who socialize together. So suddenly we make them immune from each other. They are less able to create clusters of outbreaks. So it'll be a game changer, yes.
How has the vaccine passport changed your day-to-day life, Dr. Ray?
Hasn't changed mine at all. I haven't been anywhere.
Will you go somewhere now?
I got a small child. I never leave the house. But
But by choice or because that's the nature of having a small child?
that's the nature of having a small child. But also,
Okay.
I have no social life anyway.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to happen is it'll make people more confident to go to restaurants and movie theaters and places like that. It'll reinvigorate businesses and keep businesses open longer, much like we saw with the smoking ban that was opposed by many people for weeks. The second that we saw that a lot of non-smokers really wanted to have some non-smoking time in bars and restaurants, the businesses really did well. We'll see the same thing happen here.
Do you remember when you could smoke on planes? They had smoking rows?
Yes, because smoking mysteriously and magically stayed in one row and not the others.
Exactly. I was always like, that made no sense to me, but somehow we all bought it back in the day. Dr. Raywat Deonandan, always appreciate we get smarter when we talk to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Epidemiologist, science communicator at the University of Ottawa.